So I'll introduce myself. I'm Jane Golding. I'm the chair of British in Europe. And for those of you who don't know us, British in Europe is a coalition of 10 core groups of UK citizens living in the EU 27 with a membership of around 35,000 people. And we work very closely with our colleagues, the 3 million, who represent the largest group of EU citizens in the UK. As far as British in Europe are concerned, there are approximately 1.2 million British in Europe, and 70 to 80% of us are of working age or younger, and economically active across the EU 27, and around 20% are pensioners in Spain and elsewhere. So a very large number are working age or younger. We're all Europeans, children of the European project with our colleagues from the 3 million. Brexit is not something we ever wanted, and the majority of British in Europe, as well as the 3 million, had no vote in the referendum. We estimate over 60% even of the British in Europe did not have the right to vote. But we put our faith in you and the EU to protect our rights, and we welcomed the principal approach that the EU took in the negotiating directives and the essential principles on citizens' rights. The negotiations began, and inevitably, this resulted in the worsening of the position on citizens' rights, given the counter-proposal of the UK and the compromises that then ensued. At this point, to be honest, we have no great faith in the UK to defend our rights, as we believe that their aim now is to proceed to the second phase of the negotiations, withdrawal negotiations. Indeed, we feel they have been pushing back into that territory for much of the first phase. So we now rely on the EU and you to realise that the UK approach to the negotiations is leading to a race to the bottom, which is to a sort of UK plus and EU minus. In other words, a slightly improved UK proposal and a worsening of the EU proposal. And to recognise that if sufficient progress is confirmed in December based on the current direction of the negotiations, the stated objective that Brexit should not affect the daily lives of the 3 million and British in Europe will not be achieved, unfortunately. The current position as we understand it to be, and we do appreciate that things are moving very fast at the moment on a weekly basis or faster, the current position is that, first of all, there will be no proper protection of the existing rights of EU citizens in the UK at the current state of the negotiations. Minor adjustments to administrative procedures will not detract from the fundamental position that EU citizens will be applying for a new lesser status in an environment that is hostile to immigration in the UK. There is also now a threat, given reciprocity, that this race to the bottom may be joined by some EU countries applying similar reasoning and immigration procedures to British in Europe. What we have at the moment, as far as EU citizens is concerned, the offer on the table is not declaratory of their rights, but conditional. They must make an application in order to achieve the new status. The second point is that continuing free movement across the EU for both groups through a lifelong right of return for EU citizens to the UK and continuing free movement rights across the EU 27 for UK citizens across the EU will not be preserved at the current state of the negotiations. And the knock-on effect of this for professional qualifications and economic rights affecting both groups, so that some professional qualifications won't even be recognised, and those recognised plus economic rights will be limited to the country of residence. There will also be limitations on family reunification rights in the UK for both groups, both for EU citizens in the UK and returning UK citizens to the UK who have used their rights of free movement and thus have rights under EU law when they return to the UK at the moment. The EU's positions on behalf of the EU27 on free movement, professional qualifications and economic rights are particularly difficult to understand at the moment, as they would prejudice EU citizens in the UK. The stance on recognition of qualifications will stop EU citizens living in the UK who have UK qualifications from having them recognised if they return to their home country post-Brexit. And the EU has to date not accepted a UK offer that would ensure that EU citizens living in the UK have a lifelong right to return to the UK if they have to leave for an extended period, for example, for a job posting or in order to go and look after a sick or elderly relative in their home country. And yet, in our view, all of this can be reversed. The negotiating directives and essential principles that the EU agreed are wide enough to allow this, as paragraph 20 of the negotiating directives set out to protect, and I quote, the status and rights derived from union law at the withdrawal date, including those the enjoyment of which will intervene at a later date, for example, rights related to old age pensions, as well as rights which are in the process of being obtained. And the essential principles on citizens' rights are even clearer, stating that the same level of protection as set out in union law at the date of withdrawal of EU27 citizens in the UK and of UK nationals in the EU27 should be ensured. In other words, existing rights pre-withdrawal of the protected group of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU. What is more, on top of this, going back to the free movement issue, protection of free movement rights is also specifically referred to in the negotiating directives in paragraph 21. And this was not in the original draft, but was added in the final version. So what we ask is that there should only be a finding of sufficient progress on citizens' rights when all of these fundamental issues have been resolved. Otherwise, the rights of people will be just one issue among many others in the second phase, and the likelihood of a comprehensive agreement in line with the aspirations that were set out in the negotiating directives and the essential principles will be significantly diminished. And when the comprehensive agreement is reached, it should be ring-fenced, or at least there should be a safeguard clause in there, so that it's ring-fenced from the rest of the negotiations and should stand whatever the outcome of the other negotiations on other priorities in the withdrawal agreement. But enough of the legal points. What of the social and human dimension to all of this, recently renewed in Gothenburg? As I said, we are children of the European project, a project at its heart of peace, solidarity and cooperation, a social project. That is what my British father, who aged 20 was at Belsen 2 days after its liberation, and my German father-in-law, who aged 16 survived the bombing of Dresden, hoped for their children and for their grandchildren. We are the citizens who have seized all the opportunities that EU citizenship and the fundamental freedoms have given us and taken them far beyond what the founding fathers dreamt of. The solidarity and community of our two groups, the 3 million and the British in Europe, caught up in this unprecedented situation is the expression of the European project, a community of Europeans who have together set aside our differences of nationality and culture and see only our similarities and our joint fight to defend our citizenship rights. If you disappoint us now, you quash our hopes and dreams and those of EU citizens in the future by sending a clear message that embracing EU citizenship is a risk. It can be taken away from you and you can be penalised for embracing it. EU citizenship is our fundamental status and it should protect us now in this unprecedented situation. And if not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My understanding is that now for the 3 million